The first thing Detective Grace Marlowe noticed was the way the fog swallowed light. The beams from the portable search lamps cut into it only a few feet before dissolving into a ghostly haze, like car headlights in a snowstorm. Voices echoed in warped, hollow tones, bouncing between the dark tree trunks that crowded the Blackwater River's bank. She could hear dogs barking somewhere down by the bend, handlers cursing softly when the animals strained at their lids, then just as suddenly went still. She stepped out of the sheriff's SUV and into the damp night air, the cool humidity slicking her hair against her neck. The campfire smell was still faint on the breeze, mingled with the metallic tang of the river. Overhead the moon was nothing but a pale smear. A deputy in a windbreaker approached, radio crackling. "Marlowe over here. Friends are waiting. He's been gone less than an hour." Grace took in the scene, a circle of 5 adults huddled near a clutch of tents, their faces pale and pinched. A lantern hung from a tree branch above them, throwing jittery shadows that made them look like they were standing in some old woodcut illustration. They weren't strangers to each other, but you could see the fragile threads of familiarity fraying under stress. Detective, the tallest man, mid-30s, broad-shouldered, unshaven, stepped forward. "Greg Thompson, I was the one who called it in." Grace nodded, pulling a small spiral notebook from her jacket. "Let's start at the top. Who's missing? How long has he been gone? And what happened just before?" "Ethan Cole," Greg said, 35. "He walked to the river to fill a canteen, said he'd be back in 5 minutes. That was hell, 45 minutes ago now." The woman next to him, her curly hair frizzed from the damp, cut in sharply. "It wasn't even that far. You can see the water from here if you stand in the right spot." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Natalie Diaz, we've known Ethan since college. He wouldn't just wander off." Grace's pen scratched across paper. "Was he carrying anything else? Phone, backpack?" "No phone," Natalie said. "Left it in his tent. Wallet too. He took the canteen and walked straight down that path." She pointed toward a break in the trees where a pale dirt track vanished into fog. "And you're sure nobody went with him?" Greg shook his head. "Didn't seem necessary. You could trip over the water if you weren't careful. It's that close." Grace turned to the rest of the group. "Names, Anna Kowalski," said a woman with sharp features and an accent that hinted at the Midwest. "Met Ethan through Natalie, first camping trip for me." Her eyes darted to the trees like she expected Ethan to emerge at any second. "David Carter," said a bearded man in a fleece jacket. "Known Greg forever, rock climbing buddies." "Lucy Morgan," said the last, petite, dressed in yoga pants and a hoodie, shifting from foot to foot. I just met everyone today." Grace glanced around. The camp was tidy, tents evenly spaced, cooking gear stacked, a cooler near the fire pit. No overturned chairs, no scuff marks in the dirt. That alone told her something. Whatever happened to Ethan, it didn't cause a panic at first. "All right," she said. "Walk me through it from the moment he left." They traded looks and Greg started. It was about 7:30. Sun was just dropping. "We'd been sitting around talking about tomorrow's hike. Ethan noticed we were low on water, said he'd go grab some from the river so we wouldn't have to in the morning." Natalie added, "He joked about beating the mosquitoes to it." Greg's voice tightened. 10 minutes passed, nothing. Natalie and I walked down to check, found his canteen on the gravel by the bank. No water in it, no Ethan. Grace paused her notes. "You didn't touch the canteen." Greg looked guilty. "I picked it up, thought maybe he was around somewhere, but it was just sitting there like he dropped it mid-step. Any footprints, signs of a fall?" "Sand was damp enough to hold a print," Natalie said, "but there was nothing. I swear to God, nothing. Like he didn't even make it to the shore." Lucy spoke for the first time since introductions. "We called and called. He's a loud guy," he'd have answered. Grace studied their faces. Shock was there, sure, but no deceit. The fear was too raw. She gestured to a deputy. "Let's take a walk." The path to the river was narrow, lined with underbrush that slapped at her legs. Even in the fog, she could hear the slow, heavy sound of water against the bank. A flashlight beam swept over the gravel bar, empty except for the canteen, now tagged in a plastic evidence bag. She crouched, running a gloved hand over the ground. The gravel was undisturbed, no drag marks, no prints, not even a boot scuff. The deputy muttered, "You ever seen ground this clean with someone supposedly walking on it?" Grace didn't answer. She had once, and she didn't like where that memory led. Back at the camp, the group's anxiety was ratcheting up. Natalie was pacing. Greg kept rubbing the back of his neck. Anna sat on a cooler, hugging her knees. Grace addressed them. "We've got search teams combing the area now." Dogs, too. Did Ethan have any medical issues? Diabetes, seizures, depression? A chorus of no-s. Any chance he'd leave voluntarily? Natalie's voice sharpened. "Absolutely not. He's supposed to be my man of honor next summer. He's the guy who triple-checks everyone's gear before a trip." Grace scribbled a few more notes, then softened her tone. "Okay, we'll work through the night. Stay put, stay warm, and don't wander. If you think of anything, tell Deputy Larson." As she stepped away, Greg called after her. "Detective, you've seen this before, haven't you?" She froze for half a second, then turned back. "I've seen a lot of things," and she had. The image of her younger brother, Luke, waving from the end of their driveway before vanishing into a fog bank one September morning, still clawed at her in dreams. His case was still open in name only. The official file said missing person, presumed dead. She had never accepted the last part. Down by the river, a dog barked sharply, then whimpered. A handler's voice cut through the fog. "Lost the trail." Grace's jaw tightened. 45 minutes missing was nothing in the grand scheme of search and rescue, but her gut, that stubborn, cynical voice honed over 2 decades, whispered that the clock was already ticking down in ways nobody could stop. She looked out over the black water, the fog drifting like breath over its surface, and thought, "Don't do this to me again." By sunrise, the Blackwater River was a muted silver ribbon under a sky the color of damp ash. The fog hadn't burned off. If anything, it had thickened, curling low across the water like something alive. Grace Marlowe stood with her hands shoved into her jacket pockets, listening to the radio chatter filtering in from the various search teams. Most of it was static. Even the newer digital handsets were sputtering, their signals cutting in and out like someone was flipping a switch. Half the comms went down overnight, Deputy Larson muttered beside her. Radios, GPS, even the dogs were spooked. "Never seen anything quite like it." Grace didn't respond. She was watching 2 volunteers approach along the riverbank. One of them, a wiry man in a ball cap with the name Jadden Scott stitched across the front, held something bundled in both hands. They reached her, their boots crunching on wet gravel. "Detective," Jadden's voice was low, almost hesitant. "We found these downstream. About 1.5 miles from camp." He unrolled the bundle, a navy windbreaker and a single white athletic sock. Both were dry. Both looked as if they'd been plucked straight from a dresser drawer. Greg, standing a few yards away, caught sight of them and swore under his breath. "That's Ethan's jacket. I'd stake my life on it." Grace took the windbreaker in gloved hands, feeling the fabric. Lightweight, no tears, no blood, no mud stains. But when she tested the zipper, the teeth resisted slightly, like they'd been bent and reset. The sock, too, was pristine, not even a hint of grit clinging to the threads. "Where exactly?" she asked. "Thick patch of willow scrub right up above the bend," Jadden said. "Funny thing is that area was cleared yesterday afternoon. I know because I was there." There was nothing. Greg's voice rose. "So what, they just appeared overnight? Or someone wanted them to be found now?" Grace said, eyes narrowing. Natalie had drifted over, arms wrapped tight around herself. "Why would anyone do that?" "Sometimes people scatter clothing to mislead searches," Grace said, but she didn't sound convinced. She studied their faces, Greg's confusion, Natalie's quiet dread, and wondered if they were thinking the same thing she was, that Ethan had never left that jacket and sock there himself. A handler jogged up, wiping sweat from his brow despite the chill. "Dogs lost the scent again, detective. Just stopped a few meters from camp, same as last night." Grace felt a knot tightening in her chest. "Any environmental anomalies, new prints, disturbed ground?" The handler shook his head. "Nothing. Ground's soft as clay, but it's like nobody walked it." The group stood in silence for a moment, the river's sluggish current the only sound. Natalie's voice was brittle when she finally spoke. "This isn't normal. I mean, I've read about these things. People disappearing without a trace, belongings showing up in places already searched. Grace's gaze flicked to her. What things? Natalie hesitated, glancing toward the others. Stories, missing hikers, weird stuff my uncle told me once about. Greg cut her off. Nat, don't start with that. No, Grace said, her voice calm but firm. Let her talk. Natalie swallowed. He said there are places out here where it's like the ground just swallows people. No animal tracks, no broken branches, and when something does turn up, it's clean, too clean. Grace looked down at the windbreaker in her hands, the sock lying pale against the dark gravel. The words "too clean" echoed in her mind. She zipped the evidence bags herself and handed them off to Larson. Send them to the lab, full workup, and get me the exact GPS coordinates where they were found. Larson hesitated. GPS was spotty out there. We'll have to triangulate from the river markers. Grace's lips thinned. Do it anyway. As Larson moved off, Greg took a step closer. Detective, can I ask you something? Go ahead. You've seen this before, haven't you? His eyes searched hers, and she felt the weight of the question and the memory it stirred like a stone in her throat. I've seen a lot of things, she said again, softer this time. Then she turned toward the fog-draped bend, scanning the willows where the windbreaker had lain. In her gut, she knew this wasn't random, and it wasn't just Ethan. Somewhere beyond the fog, someone was placing pieces on the board, and she'd just been handed her first move. The Blackwater County Sheriff's Department had no real archive room, just a converted storage closet behind the squad room. The air inside smelled faintly of dust and copier toner. Old cardboard boxes sat on metal shelves, hand-lettered labels curling at the corners. Grace balanced a styrofoam cup of black coffee in one hand and flipped open the nearest box with the other. Inside were case files so worn their manila folders had gone soft at the edges. Looking for something in particular, Chief Deputy Hank Torrance leaned in the doorway, arms folded. His bulk filled the frame. He had the kind of presence that could either comfort or intimidate, depending on the day. Older missing persons, Grace said without looking up. Anywhere in the county, last 15 years. Hank grunted. That's a wide net. You got a reason or just fishing? She pulled a folder free and spread its contents across the desk, a grainy photo of a young man in hiking gear, a map with a red X and a thin incident report. Ethan Cole's disappearance is ringing bells. I've seen this combination before. No signs of struggle, no footprints, belongings found in places already searched. Hank stepped inside, the floor creaking under his boots. You're thinking patterns, I'm thinking coincidence. 3 cases isn't coincidence. She slid another folder across to him. Miles Donahue, photographer, went missing from a cliff trail in Virginia, 2015. Rachel Mercer, solo hiker in Maine, 2009. Caleb Stroud found dead weeks later in a spot searched multiple times, Tennessee, 2014. He glanced at the reports, then back at her. Those aren't ours, Grace. You've been digging outside jurisdiction. Yeah, she sipped her coffee, because whatever's happening here doesn't care about county lines. Hank's jaw tightened. You start talking like that in front of the brass, they'll write you off as chasing ghosts. I'm not chasing ghosts. She tapped the photo of Miles Donahue. These are people, they were with friends in daylight in areas where help was minutes away. Then they weren't, and when something turns up, clothing, gear, it's clean like it was placed. That's not nature, that's not random. Hank sighed, rubbing his forehead. You ever consider maybe you're seeing your brother in all of this? The words landed like a gut punch. Grace forced her tone flat. Luke's case is still open, and if I see a connection, I follow it. Hank studied her for a moment, then reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. This came in for you last night, found it under your office door. She unfolded it. A single line scrawled in block letters, the river KEPS what it wants, no signature. Her pulse ticked up. You recognize the handwriting, Hank shook his head. Could be anyone, could be nothing. Grace refolded the note, sliding it into her jacket, or it could be someone who knows more than they're saying. That night Grace sat at her kitchen table, a dozen printed maps spread out in front of her. She marked each disappearance with a red pin: Ethan Cole, Miles Donahue, Rachel Mercer, Caleb Stroud. The pins formed a loose corridor running along old logging trails and river routes, some still marked on current maps, others erased by time. She leaned back, staring at the pattern. Coincidence or not, it was enough to justify digging deeper. Her phone buzzed, unknown number. She let it go to voicemail, but the message came through almost immediately. A man's voice, low and rough, saying, "If you want to know where your hiker went, meet me at the Rusted Lantern Diner. Tomorrow, noon." No name, no explanation. Grace sat very still, the maps and pins frozen in front of her. She'd been doing this long enough to know that people who wanted to help didn't usually hide their names, but people who knew something, they hid everything. And sometimes you had to walk straight into that shadow to pull them into the light. The Rusted Lantern Diner sat on the edge of a cracked two-lane highway, a low-slung brick building with a flickering neon sign that hadn't shone steady since the late 90s. The parking lot was half dirt, half broken asphalt, puddles glittering from last night's drizzle. Grace pulled in 10 minutes early, slid her unmarked sedan into a space facing the road, and killed the engine. The place was the kind of joint where the coffee was strong enough to chew, and the gossip at the counter traveled faster than the Wi-Fi. She'd eaten here before on stakeouts, fried eggs, bacon, and the uneasy company of locals who always seemed to know you weren't really there for breakfast. Through the rain-specked windshield, she scanned the booths inside. A couple of truckers hunched over plates of pancakes. Two women in nursing scrubs sat near the window, trading bites of pie. No one who looked like the voice from the message. Grace checked her phone. 11:53 a.m. She slid her badge into the inside pocket of her leather jacket, stepped out into the cool air, and crossed the lot. The diner door's bell gave a half-hearted jingle when she pushed it open. Inside, the smell of frying onions and burnt coffee clung to the warm air. Country music played faintly from a wall-mounted radio. A waitress in a faded pink uniform, Donna, her tag said, looked up from wiping the counter. "Sit anywhere, hun. You want lunch, menu, or breakfast?" "Coffee, black," Grace said, "and maybe a slice of that peach pie in the case." Donna nodded. "You got it." Booth or counter? Booth. Grace took the farthest booth in the corner, the one with a view of the door. She kept her phone on the table, screen dark, eyes flicking up every time the bell jangled. The minutes stretched. At 12:07, a man walked in, tall, rangy, with a denim jacket that looked older than he was and a battered baseball cap pulled low. His beard was patchy, his jeans frayed. He scanned the diner once, spotted her, and headed over without hesitation. Detective Marlowe. His voice was rough, rasping from either cigarettes or too many winters outdoors. "That's me," Grace said. "You must be the one who called." He slid into the seat opposite her, his movements deliberate, like someone used to sizing up a situation before making a move. "Name's Jasper Bellamy." "Folks call me Hawk." "Hawk," she repeated, non-committal. "You said you know something about Ethan Cole." "I saw him," Hawk said simply, "after he went missing." Grace leaned in slightly. "When?" "Night of the 18th, maybe an hour after you all started tearing up the riverbank." That caught her. "Where?" "Other side of the Blackwater, about a mile down. Was checking my catfish lines." "Fog was thick, but I know those banks like my own damn hands." He rubbed his thumb against his forefinger, like feeling the shape of the shoreline. "Saw a man, tall, dark hair, wearing no shoes. Walked right out of the willows and into the woods, quiet as smoke." Grace studied him. "Barefoot, you're sure?" "Sure as I'm sitting here." His feet hit that mud, didn't make a sound. Hawk's eyes narrowed. "Looked wrong, though." "Wrong how?" He shifted in his seat. Expression, or maybe the lack of one. Eyes were open but empty, like he was sleepwalking, only faster. Donna arrived with Grace's coffee and pie. Hawk ordered nothing. The waitress gave him a wary glance before heading back toward the counter. "You tell the sheriff's office this when it happened?" Grace asked. Hawk gave a humorless laugh. "Told Deputy Collins." He nodded, wrote something down, "never called me back. I'm the guy they say drinks too much, sees things in the fog. Folks in town don't take me serious unless I'm hauling in a 40-pound catfish." Grace took a slow sip of coffee, watching him over the rim of the mug. "Do you drink too much?" "Not when I'm running lines," Hawk said evenly. "Not when I'm looking at a man I know damn well shouldn't be on that side of the river." She let that sit for a moment, fork poised over the pie. What was he wearing? Dark pants, light shirt. Pants were wet up to the knees. Shirt was dry. Hawk's gaze sharpened. That's the part that stuck. How's a man cross a river in the fog barefoot, get his pants soaked but keep his shirt dry? Grace set down her fork. You think someone put him there? I think he didn't get there himself, Hawk said. You don't cross Blackwater on foot, not at night, not without knowing the channels. There's sinkholes, snags, sudden drop-offs. One wrong step and you're gone. Why come to me now? Hawk's jaw worked. Saw the news last night. Girl from Asheville gone missing in the park. Same look in her picture as that guy had, eyes that see something the rest of us don't. Grace's mind flicked to Maya Ellis, the second disappearance. You think they're connected. I think you're gonna find more, Hawk said, if you keep looking where folks tell you not to. She leaned back, and where would that be? Hawk hesitated, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. It was a crude hand-drawn map, the river, some unlabeled trails, a shaded area marked with an X on the far bank. That's where I saw him go in, Hawk said. If you're smart, you'll go there in daylight and not alone. Grace took the map. Anyone else know about this spot? Not unless you told M, Hawk said, and I wouldn't. There's places the woods don't want you. Something in his tone made the hair on her arms rise. She slid the map into her jacket. You carrying any weapons when you were out there? Always, Hawk said. Ain't for people, though. Coyotes, cats, sometimes. Grace glanced toward the window. The fog outside was lifting just a little, revealing the skeletal line of trees along the highway. All right, Hawk, if I have more questions, you'll find me on the river, he said, standing. Don't bring a crowd. He left without another word. The bell over the door jangled, and his silhouette melted into the thin gray light. Grace finished her coffee slowly, turning the conversation over in her head. Hawk could be embellishing, mistaken, or flat-out lying. But the details, barefoot, wet to the knees, shirt dry, were the kind that stuck with you. And that crude X on the map tugged at her curiosity like a hook in the gut. Back at the station, she spread the map over her desk, aligning it with the official survey charts. The X was on the far bank, opposite a section of river with no official crossing. The only way over without a boat was a narrow, submerged ridge of shale that locals called the Devil's Spine. At low water you could see it. At high water it vanished under a couple of feet of current. She remembered Hawk's words, you don't cross Blackwater on foot, not at night. She was still staring at the map when Leo Vance appeared in her doorway. The Asheville detective had a lean build, a rumpled suit, and the kind of smile that tried to disarm you before you noticed the sharp eyes behind it. Thought I'd swing by since your sheriff won't return my calls, Leo said. I hear you've got a missing man who walked into thin air. I've got a missing woman who might have been on the same bus. Grace gestured him in, closed the door. They sat across from each other, the map between them. Grace filled him in on Ethan Cole, the clean windbreaker and sock, the vanishing scent trails. Leo countered with Maya Ellis's last run through the park, her upright water bottle on the bridge, and a jogger who swore he saw a barefoot guy on a side path 20 minutes later. Barefoot, Grace repeated. Pants wet to the knees, Leo blinked. Yeah, how the hell did you? She slid Hawk's map toward him. Witness saw the same thing the night Ethan disappeared, other side of the river. Leo studied the crude X. You believe him. I believe he saw something, Grace said, and I believe this spot isn't on any official search grid. Leo tapped the map. Then we go tomorrow, daylight. Grace shook her head. No, tonight. Fog's been rolling in around midnight. I want to see the conditions as they were. That's dangerous, Leo said. If there's someone out there, that's the point. Grace's voice was calm, but inside she felt that restless pull again, the same one that had driven her to chase leads in her brother's case long after everyone else gave up. We're not going to find them by playing safe. By the time they reached the trailhead that night, the moon was a hazy coin behind high cloud. Grace carried a compact flashlight, Leo a handheld GPS that flickered uncertainly between coordinates. The air was cool and heavy, smelling of wet leaves. They followed Hawk's directions downriver, the sound of water growing louder until they stood at the bank opposite the X on the map. The far side was a black wall of willows, their branches trailing like hair in the current. "There," Leo said quietly, pointing. A pale line shimmered just under the water, the devil's spine, faint but visible in the beam of his flashlight. Grace stepped closer, scanning the shallows. No fresh prints on the muddy edge, no sign of a crossing. But the feeling was there, that prickle at the base of her skull, the instinct that told her they were standing in someone else's territory. "Let's mark it and go," Leo said. "We can come back with more." A splash cut him off. Not the quick plop of a fish, but the slow, deliberate sound of something heavy entering the water downstream. They froze. Grace flicked off her light. The darkness pressed close. Another splash, then nothing. Leo whispered, "We're not alone out here." Grace didn't answer. Her eyes were on the black surface of the river, where a ripple moved against the current, heading toward the devil's spine. They stayed until the fog began to curl low over the water, swallowing the far bank. No one emerged from the willows. No more splashes came. But as they hiked back, Grace felt the weight of Hawk's warning settle deeper in her bones. There were places the woods didn't want you. And now she knew exactly where one of them was. The phone on Grace's desk began to buzz before she'd even set her coffee down. It was barely past 8, the station still in that slow shuffle of early morning, deputies straggling in, the smell of burnt toast drifting from the break room, the low hum of police radio murmuring in the background. She saw the caller ID, Asheville PD. Grace grabbed the receiver. "Marlowe," the voice on the other end was brisk, clipped. "Detective Vance asked me to call you directly. We've got another one." Her pulse ticked up. "Another what?" "Disappearance. Female, 29, names Maya Ellis. Last confirmed sighting was this morning, 6:10 a.m. in McKinley Park, East Loop Trail. She went for her usual run, never came back." Her car is still in the lot. Grace pinched the bridge of her nose, and water bottle was found upright on the center rail of the east bridge, cell phone in the cup holder of the car, no signs of a struggle. Jogger claims he saw a man barefoot about 20 minutes after she was last seen. The room seemed to tilt a fraction. Pants wet to the knees, there was a pause. "Yes." "Detective, you want to tell me how you—" "Send me everything you've got," Grace said. "Photos, witness statements, GPS points, now." By the time Leo Vance strode into the Blackwater County Station an hour later, Grace already had Maya Ellis's details spread across her desk, glossy DMV photo, a printout from the runner's fitness tracker showing the last location ping, the report from the jogger who'd seen the barefoot man. Leo tossed his jacket on the chair opposite. "I told you last night something's tying these together." "And now we've got a pattern," Grace said. "Ethan Cole, Maya Ellis, and whoever our barefoot friend is." Leo leaned over the desk, eyes scanning the fitness tracker map. She stopped mid-run right at the bridge. No heart rate spike like she was sprinting, just flatline. Like she stopped to talk to someone, Grace said, or got distracted or lured. His voice tightened. "You know how many solo runners I see at dawn, headphones in, no situational awareness." Grace flipped a photo toward him, the bridge, narrow and steel-railed, spanning a low creek. The water below was sluggish, maybe 2 feet deep at most. If someone grabbed her here, there should have been signs, scuffs on the walkway, dropped gear. Leo shook his head. Nothing. "It's like she stepped off the bridge and evaporated." Grace tapped the edge of the photo, or was walked off, quietly. The media had already caught the scent by noon. By the time Grace left the station for a briefing at McKinley Park, there were 3 vans parked along the curb, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Reporters huddled under umbrellas, microphones in hand, shouting questions at anyone who looked vaguely official. "Detective Marlowe, is it true there's a barefoot suspect? Are the disappearances connected? Should the public be concerned?" Grace ignored them, pushing through the crowd toward the park's east entrance where Asheville PD had set up a temporary command post. A pair of pop-up tents, folding tables stacked with maps, and a wall of whiteboards already crowded with notes. Leo met her at the edge of the tape. "You're just in time for the zoo." The lead park ranger, a tall woman in a rain jacket with Hathaway on the badge, walked them through the timeline. Ellis parks at 5:52. Surveillance shows her stretching, starting her run. Last sighting on camera is East Loop entrance at 6:04. Witness places her on the bridge around 6:10. At 6:30, another runner sees a man, no shoes, dark pants, moving fast on the fire road. Grace scanned the map. The fire road led east, straight toward the wooded ridgeline that ran parallel to Blackwater River. "You checked the ridge?" Grace asked. "We've got teams in there now," Hathaway said. "Dogs, too, but rain's coming in this afternoon, whatever sense there won't last." Leo muttered, "Of course it's raining." Grace and Leo walked the East Loop themselves. The park was the kind of municipal green space that felt bigger than it was. Winding trails, a patchwork of pines and hardwoods, the creek running like a lazy seam through the middle. The bridge where Maya was last seen was narrower than Grace expected. Wooden planks, damp from the morning dew, creaked under their weight. She stopped halfway, leaning over the rail to study the water. The creek was murky, swirling with pollen and the occasional leaf. Too shallow to hide anything, but it wound out of sight under a canopy of willows 100 yards downstream. "Ranger said the jogger saw the barefoot man here," she asked. Leo shook his head. "No, on the fire road, about a mile east." Grace straightened. "Then the question is, how did he get from here to there without being seen? And where's Maya in that window?" They stood in silence, the only sound the drone of cicadas. Grace felt that prickling sensation again, the one she'd had by the devil's spine, like the place itself was holding its breath. By mid-afternoon, the rain moved in, a steady drizzle that blurred the edges of the trees and turned the fire road to mud. Grace and Leo huddled under the tent with the other officers, watching the whiteboards fill with dead ends. No fresh prints, no recovered items, dogs losing scent within yards. Leo rubbed a hand over his jaw. "This isn't just opportunistic. Whoever's doing this knows these areas. Knows where coverage is thin, where to move without being seen, and knows how to make people vanish without noise," Grace added. The operations captain, a stocky man with a buzz cut, looked up from his clipboard. "We're putting out a public alert, female joggers especially, paired patrols on the trails until further notice." Grace caught Leo's glance. "That's not going to stop him," she murmured. "No," Leo said, "but it might flush him." By the time Grace got back to Blackwater that evening, her desk phone was blinking with 3 new voicemails, 2 from reporters, 1 from Hawk. She played his message last. "Told you you'd find more. You're looking at the wrong bank. Call me." She stared at the receiver for a long moment, the rain pattering against the window. She met Hawk the next morning in the back booth of the Rusted Lantern. He looked like he hadn't slept. "Maya Ellis," he said without preamble. "That name ring for you?" Grace nodded. "She went missing yesterday morning." "I've been running the river every night," Hawk said. "Something moving out there, not animals. You can feel it. Trees go quiet. Fog comes in hard, even with no rain." Grace sipped her coffee. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your man or men are using the water as cover. Not just the river, the old channels, the flood cuts. Most folks don't even know they're there." Grace leaned forward. "And you do." Hawk's mouth twitched. "Spent 40 years learning this river. I know where a man could walk 2 miles and never break the tree line." He pulled another folded sheet from his jacket, a more detailed map this time, with lines drawn like veins off the main river. "These channels, they don't show on the new maps, but they link the park to Blackwater in under an hour if you know the way." Grace studied the map. The pieces clicked, Ethan disappearing near the river, Maya near a creek that fed into these hidden channels. Both sightings of the barefoot man along routes that skirted official search zones. "You willing to show me?" she asked. Hawk hesitated. "Daylight only, and you bring backup. The spine's got nothing on these cuts." That afternoon, Grace and Leo followed Hawk through a tangle of underbrush that tore at their clothes. The air was cooler in the channels, the walls of earth rising steeply on either side. Water trickled along the bottom, shallow but fast-moving. "Flood cuts from the logging days," Hawk said over his shoulder. "They snake all the way to the river. Stay in here, you're invisible from above." Leo whistled low. "You could move someone through here without a soul knowing." "Exactly," Hawk said, "and if you time it with the fog off the water." Grace cut him off. "We get it." They pushed on, the mud sucking at their boots, until Hawk stopped at a split where one channel veered west toward the park and the other south toward Blackwater. This is your crossroads, Hawk said. From here, you can go to the park in under 40 minutes, river in 25. Grace crouched, touching the mud. Faint impressions, not boot tread, but bare toes, marked the damp earth, already softening in the drizzle. She looked up at Hawk. When did you last come through here? 2 nights ago. Leo's eyes met hers. That's fresh. By the time they got back to town, the rain had washed away whatever was left of the prints, but the shape of the channels was burned into Grace's mind. She stayed late at the station, mapping every disappearance, every sighting, every channel Hawk had shown them. The red pins began to cluster in a way she hadn't seen before, a corridor of movement, always near water, always with exit routes that bypassed populated areas. Ethan, Cole, Maya Ellis, and maybe more they hadn't linked yet. She sat back, the hum of the overhead lights loud in the empty office. Whoever was behind this wasn't just choosing victims, they were choosing terrain, and unless she found a way to trap them inside their own hunting ground, they were going to keep vanishing into the fog, barefoot, silent, and gone before anyone knew they were there. Grace had seen plenty of bulletin boards in her career, missing persons grids, suspect trees, timelines drawn in thick marker, but the one in her office now looked like something from a conspiracy documentary. 2 maps took up most of the space. The first, a standard county survey with pushpins marking Ethan Cole's last known location, Maya Ellis's bridge, and the faint toe prints Hawk had shown them in the channels. The second, a composite of 3 other disappearances she'd pulled from old case files in neighboring jurisdictions. Red string connected certain pins, blue for others, yellow for waterways. In the center, tacked at an angle, was Hawk's second map, the one showing the old flood channels. Leo stood with his hands in his pockets, eyes tracking the strings. "You've been busy. I don't sleep much," Grace said, sipping cold coffee. "And I've been chasing these patterns since before you called about Maya." He stepped closer, tracing one of the red lines with his finger. "So you're saying all 6 disappearances, Ethan, Maya, and 4 others, fall within this corridor?" "Corridor's the right word," Grace said. "Water on one side, high ridge on the other, limited entry points, all of them chokeable." Leo glanced at her, and every single one happened within a mile of a fog event. Grace tapped the corner of a printout, weather service data she'd pulled from the past decade. "Fog's not uncommon here, but these, sudden onset dense, often without temperature inversion or humidity spikes to explain it, almost like someone's timing their moves with it. Or someone's making use of something they know happens here," Leo said. "Local knowledge." Grace gave him a thin smile. Exactly. They sat at her desk, flipping through old reports. The patterns weren't just geographical, the circumstances had eerie similarities. Case 1, Ethan Cole, canteen on the gravel, no prints, windbreaker and sock found in previously cleared area. Case 2, Maya Ellis, water bottle upright on bridge rail, phone in car, barefoot man sighting 20 minutes later. Case 3, Miles Donahue, 2015, camera left neatly on trail, last photo angled oddly as if taken by accident, fog rolled in minutes after last sighting. Case 4, Rachel Mercer, 2009, tent left with belongings, last message from summit before vanishing, weather clear then sudden mist. Leo tapped the last one. "I'm starting to think we're not looking at just one suspect, could be multiple." "Could be an organized group." Grace shook her head. "If it's multiple, they're disciplined, no chatter between them, no sloppy mistakes, and they know these places, terrain, weather, where the search grids end." Leo lined back, "Which means they've either lived here a long time or they've got access to land no one else does." That sparked something. Grace reached for another file, a faded property map from the county recorder's office. "The ridge, the one that runs parallel to the Blackwater, you know who owns half of that?" Leo scanned the name. "Vexler Holdings." "Harlan Vexler," Grace said, "private landowner, reclusive, inherited a fortune from timber and mining. His property sits right on top of the old logging trails." "And guess what runs along the southern boundary?" Leo leaned in. "The flood channels." Bingo. Grace had heard stories about Vexler in the same way you hear about weather systems, distant, unpredictable, and occasionally destructive. He was in his late 60s now, lived alone in a sprawling Victorian on the edge of his land, and was known mostly for his stubborn refusal to sell or lease any part of it. Hunters had been chased off with legal threats. Hikers who strayed onto the trails found themselves met by silent men in work boots and ball caps who escorted them back to the boundary without a word. "He's not exactly friendly to law enforcement," Grace said, shuffling through clipped articles. "And he's got a network of old mining shafts and storm culverts on his land, most sealed, but some," she slid over a photo from a 2012 inspection report showing a yawning dark opening in the side of a wooded hill, "are wide open." Leo studied the image. If someone wanted to move people or stash them, this would be perfect. Underground, out of sight, probably miles of connected tunnels. And private property means no one's searching it without cause, Grace added. The more they dug, the more the fog thickened, figuratively this time. County records showed that Wexler had applied for and received multiple maintenance permits over the years for erosion control and culvert stabilization, but the listed contractors were shell companies. "Paper trail's a mess," Leo said, scrolling on his laptop. "Some of these LLCs don't even exist anymore. Others list P.O. boxes in states he's never set foot in." Grace rubbed her temple. "It's a smoke screen. If you've got enough money, you can bury anything in paperwork." He glanced at her. "So what's your play?" She looked at the map, at the strings connecting the flood channels to the park, to the river, to the pins marking Ethan and Maya. "We go talk to him." The drive to Harlan Wexler's property was a winding, two-lane climb through switchbacks lined with hemlock and pine. By the time they reached the wrought iron gate, the clouds had sunk low over the ridge. The gate was flanked by stone pillars, each topped with a weathered lantern that hadn't been lit in years. A black intercom box jutted from the left pillar. Grace pressed the button. Static hissed, then a deep, gravelly voice came through. "Who is it?" "Detective Marlowe, Blackwater County Sheriff's Department." "I'm here with Detective Vance, Asheville PD. We'd like to speak with you about some activity near your property." A pause. "You got a warrant?" "No, sir," Grace said evenly. "Just a few questions." Another long pause. "Gates open. Follow the drive. Don't wander." The gate creaked and groaned as it swung inward. The Victorian house sat like a brooding sentinel in the middle of a clearing. 3 stories, dark wood siding, a widow's walk along the roofline. Curtains were drawn tight in every visible window. Wexler met them on the front steps. He was tall, raw-boned, dressed in a wool vest over a collared shirt despite the mild day. His hair was silver, combed straight back, his eyes pale and hard. "Detectives." His voice was a low rasp like tires on gravel. "Let's make this quick." Grace offered her hand. He didn't take it. "We're investigating disappearances along the Blackwater corridor. In multiple cases, the last known locations are near your southern boundary." Wexler's expression didn't change. "You think I've got your missing people? I think your property contains terrain features that could be relevant," Grace said. "Old channels, culverts, mine shafts." He gave a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I keep the old river path clear, always have. Those shafts are dangerous, that's why they're sealed." "Not all of them," Leo said. "We've seen the inspection reports." Wexler's gaze slid to him. "Then you also know they're on private land, which means you'll need a warrant to go poking around." Grace held his stare. "If you've got nothing to hide, you could save us the paperwork." "I've got plenty to hide, Detective," Wexler said, almost amused. "Just not what you're looking for." She stepped forward slightly. "And what is it we're looking for, in your opinion?" "Things you can't put in a report," he said quietly. "Things the river keeps because the river wants them. You chase that too far, you won't come back." The words hung in the air like mist. Leo broke the silence. "We'll be in touch." Wexler nodded once, turned, and walked back into the house without another word. The door shut with a heavy thud. Back in the car, Leo exhaled. Well, that was friendly. Grace was still staring at the house in the rearview mirror as the gate swung closed behind them. "He knows something. He's not scared of us, but he wants us off his land." Leo buckled in. "So we either get a warrant or we find another way in," Grace finished. Outside, the fog was starting to creep back in, curling low along the ditch beside the road, and somewhere in that fog, she thought, someone was watching them leave. Grace didn't sleep much after that first visit. She replayed Wexler's words over and over, things you can't put in a report. The river keeps what it wants. It wasn't just cryptic, it was deliberate, a warning wrapped in a challenge. By mid-morning, she'd made up her mind. She was going back. Leo wasn't thrilled when she told him. "We've got nothing new to lean on him with," he said, pacing her office. "And we still don't have probable cause for a search warrant." "I'm not going for a search," Grace replied, shrugging into her jacket. "I'm going for a conversation." Leo stopped pacing. "You think he'll open up more the second time around?" "I think if I push the right button he might slip," she said. "And if he slips, we can pull the thread." The weather was turning by the time she reached the ridge road again. Clouds pressed low and a thin mist clung to the tree line. The wrought iron gate stood closed as before. She pressed the intercom. This time the pause was longer. "It's Marlowe," she said. "I'd like to follow up on our last talk." The speaker crackled. "I thought we were done." "You thought wrong," Grace said evenly. "I'm here." "Gate's locked. You want me to sit out here with the engine running until I start calling in other units?" A low, gravelly chuckle came through, persistent. The gate clicked and swung inward. Wexler was waiting on the porch again, though this time he wore a heavy canvas coat and work gloves, like she'd interrupted him in the middle of something. His eyes flicked to her hands, checking for paperwork or a recorder. "No warrant?" he asked. "Not today." Grace climbed the steps, just questions. He gestured to 2 rocking chairs under the covered porch. "Then sit, I'll give you 10 minutes. The wood creaked under her weight as she sat. From here, she could see the sprawl of his land, rolling, pine-covered hills giving way to shadowy gullies. Somewhere out there, she knew, were the flood channels and mine shafts. "You said you keep the old river path clear," she began. "Why?" His gaze stayed fixed on the horizon. "Because no one else will. County won't maintain what it doesn't own, and the land's been in my family since before your badge existed. That path connect to those old channels. Some," he said, "some go deeper, farther. Places you can't see on a map, places you could hide people." She asked. That earned her the faintest twitch of a smile. "You're fishing, detective. I'm asking if you know this terrain well enough to move someone without anyone knowing." "I know it well enough to move myself without anyone knowing," Wexler said. "What other people do on my land is not my business." Grace leaned forward. "When was the last time you saw anyone near the southern boundary, near the river?" He was quiet for a moment, the only sound the wind stirring the pines. "Then, 2 nights before your hiker vanished, heard movement near the spine. Fog rolled in fast, thicker than I've seen in years. You investigate. I know when to stay out of the fog," he said simply. "So should you." Grace let the silence stretch, hoping he'd fill it, and he did. "My grandfather used to say there were places on this ridge where the ground swallows men whole," Wexler said. "Sinkholes, caves, old tunnels that collapse without warning. You go in, you might not come out, and if you do, you won't be the same." "That's a hell of a campfire story," Grace said. "You expect me to believe people just vanish in your woods by accident. I expect you to believe what you see with your own eyes," he said, "and I expect you to understand that not every disappearance has a culprit you can cuff." Grace studied him. "Do you know Hawk Bellamy?" That got his full attention. His pale eyes narrowed. "Why?" "He says he knows these channels as well as you. Says they can get you from the park to the river in under an hour." "Then Hawk's been talking too much," Wexler said coldly. "And if you're smart, you won't believe half of what comes out of his mouth." "Funny," Grace said. "He told me the same about you." For the first time, she saw something flicker across Wexler's face, not anger exactly, but calculation. "You think Hawk's your guide in all this?" he asked. "He's a scavenger, lives off whatever the river coughs up, finds things, sometimes people, and sells the stories to whoever will listen." "But you've seen the same things he has," Grace pressed. Wexler's gaze slid back to the horizon. "I've seen more, enough to know you don't go looking unless you're ready for what you'll find." "Try me," Grace said. He looked at her then, a long, measuring stare. "Detective, you're chasing a thread that runs deeper than your missing jogger or your hiker. You keep pulling, you'll get tangled, and the river doesn't untangle." Her phone buzzed in her pocket, shattering the moment. It was Leo. "What?" she muttered. "We've got another sighting," Leo said. "Barefoot male, pants wet." Seen cutting across the North Fire Road about 20 minutes ago. Grace's mind clicked into gear. The North Fire Road wasn't far from here. Get me the coordinates. She ended the call and stood. Thanks for your time, Mr. Vexler. He rocked once in his chair. Careful on that road, fog's rolling in. Back in her car, she watched the gate close behind her in the rearview mirror. Vexler was still on the porch, hands resting on the arms of his chair, eyes tracking her until she was out of sight. She didn't know yet if he was a piece on the board or the one moving them, but she knew this much. Vexler was sitting on land that could swallow people whole, and he was comfortable letting it happen. The coordinates Leo had sent lit up on Grace's GPS like a beacon, a point barely half a mile from Vexler's north property line, where the ridge dropped into a gully thick with willow and alder. By the time she met Leo at the trailhead, the light was draining from the sky. A bruised purple dusk had settled over the trees, and the fog was already beginning to gather in the low places. Last sighting was 20 minutes before I called you, Leo said, adjusting the strap of his pack. Park maintenance guy spotted the barefoot male cutting across the fire road, says the guy didn't even look at him. Grace checked her sidearm. Which direction? Leo pointed. Down into the gully. They started in, the fire road giving way to a narrow track. Underfoot, the ground was soft and uneven, littered with wet leaves that muffled their steps. The air smelled of damp earth and something else, a faint mineral tang that reminded Grace of basements after a flood. Feels like we're walking into a bowl, Leo murmured. That's because we are, Grace said. Flood channels run through here. Hawk said you can stay invisible if you keep low. The fog thickened as they descended. Sounds became muted, even their footfalls seemed to vanish into the damp air. 100 yards in, the gully opened into a narrow trench carved by decades of water. The walls rose 10 feet high, slick with moss. A shallow ribbon of water trickled along the bottom, just enough to make the mud treacherous. Leo scanned ahead with his flashlight. If I were moving someone, this is exactly where I'd do it. Grace crouched, brushing her gloved fingers over the mud. The impression of bare toes was faint, already softening at the edges but unmistakable. We've got fresh sign. They followed the prints for another 100 yards before the channel split in two. One arm veered west toward the river, the other bent south into darker terrain where the fog pooled thick as milk. Which way? Leo asked. Grace hesitated, then pointed south. If I wanted to lose a tail, I'd go where visibility drops. The farther they went, the more oppressive the fog became. It clung to their faces, dampened their hair, beaded on their eyelashes. The beam of Grace's flashlight barely reached 10 feet. A sound drifted through the mist, a faint, rhythmic splash like someone wading slowly through shallow water. They froze. That's not runoff, Leo whispered. Grace gestured for him to kill his light. The darkness folded over them like a curtain. They stood still, listening. The splashing grew louder, closer, then stopped. Grace's pulse thudded in her ears. "Hello," she called, her voice low but carrying. Silence. Then from somewhere in the fog, a single, deliberate footstep. She flicked her light back on. The beam caught nothing but swirling mist. No figure, no movement. Leo scanned left, then right. We're not alone. They moved forward cautiously, keeping the channel wall to their right. The prints appeared again, deeper now, as if the person had been moving faster. Grace noted something else. Alongside the larger prints was a smaller set, lighter but still barefoot. She exchanged a look with Leo. "We've got two." The channel curved sharply, and suddenly the wall to their right broke away into a yawning black opening. The air spilling from it was colder, carrying a stale, stone-heavy scent. Leo aimed his light inside. The beam disappeared after 20 feet, swallowed by darkness. The ground just inside was churned with muddy footprints. "Culvert," he said. "Mine shaft entrance," Grace corrected. "Vexler's property line isn't far from here." They stepped inside. The temperature dropped instantly, their breath ghosting in the beam of the flashlight. The walls were rough-hewn stone, slick with moisture. Water dripped steadily somewhere ahead, the sound echoing. Grace kept her voice low. If they brought someone in here, this would kill any trail. No scent for dogs, no aerial visibility. They pushed deeper, the passage narrowing until they had to walk single file. Grace's shoulders brushed the walls, the flashlight beam jittered over rusted support beams and the occasional length of old pipe. A faint sound reached them, not water this time, but something softer, a muffled cry. Grace stopped dead, raising a hand. "Did you hear?" "Yes," Leo said, already moving past her. They rounded a bend and the beam caught movement ahead, a shadow slipping out of sight into a side tunnel. "Police," Grace's voice cracked against the stone. "Stop." The shadow didn't stop. They sprinted. The tunnel floor was slick, the footing uncertain. Grace's light flashed over another set of prints, the smaller ones, fresher now, the mud still glistening. The muffled cry came again, closer. They hit the side tunnel just in time to catch a glimpse, a man's back, bare feet pounding over stone, the pale hem of soaked pants clinging to his calves. In his grip, someone struggling. Grace lunged forward, but the man vanished around another bend. The tunnel here sloped upward, and the air felt different, fresher, tinged with the scent of pine. "He's heading for an exit," Leo said. They gave chase, but the slope was slick, and twice Grace's boots slid out from under her. By the time they scrambled up the last rise, they emerged into open air, a clearing halfway down a wooded slope. The fog here was thicker than anywhere else, a rolling white sea that obscured everything beyond 10 yards. The prints led straight into it. They followed, but the fog swallowed sound and sight. The forest was eerily quiet, even the wind seemed to have died. "Grace," Leo said softly, "we've lost him." She turned in a slow circle, her heart hammering. The fog shifted and curled, almost like it was moving around them. Somewhere beyond it, a branch cracked, deliberate, not wind, then silence again. They backed out toward the clearing, retracing their steps. When they reached the mine entrance again, Grace felt the first true chill of the night crawl up her spine. In the mud at the threshold, fresh prints overlapped their own bare feet, both large and small, heading out. She looked at Leo. "They circled us." By the time they reached the fire road, the fog was thinning. Their radios crackled back to life, but the voices on the other end were miles away. They didn't speak until they reached the vehicles. Leo leaned against his SUV, wiping a sleeve across his face. "Whoever that was, they know the channels," he said. "They know the mines, and they're not afraid of us." Grace stared back toward the gully, the mist still curling lazily between the trees. "No," she said, "they're hunting in their own backyard." The morning after the chase, Grace's office looked like a war room. Maps were pinned edge to edge along one wall. A satellite photo of the Blackwater corridor sat in the middle, ringed by the locations of Ethan Cole's and Maya Ellis's last sightings, the flood channels Hawk had traced, and the mine entrance where she and Leo had made contact. Leo leaned over the desk, nursing a mug of bad coffee. His eyes were still shadowed from the night before. "They circled us, Grace. You realize what that means, right?" She tapped the mine photo. "It means they weren't spooked by us, they were studying us, and if someone's willing to walk barefoot through these channels at night carrying another human being, they're confident. Confident enough to come back," Leo asked. "That's what I'm counting on." Her plan was simple on paper: create a scenario that the suspect couldn't resist, a lone victim, moving through the corridor on foot near dusk in an area where the flood channels offered concealment. Grace would play the bait. "You really think this guy's going to go after a cop?" Leo asked. "He won't know I'm a cop," Grace said. "Plain clothes, running gear, headlamp, but no radio in sight. If he's hunting patterns, this'll look like the perfect opportunity." Leo crossed his arms. "And what happens if he takes the bait?" "We've got you and 2 other units shadowing me from the ridges," Grace said. "Thermal scopes, radios on a secure channel. Hawk S. agreed to position himself at the channel split. If the suspect tries to use the mine entrance, Hawk will see him." "You trust Hawk that much?" Grace gave him a thin smile. "I trust that Hawk knows these channels better than anyone, and he doesn't want this guy operating on his river." They picked their spot carefully, a stretch of the East Loop Trail near where Maya had last been seen, but closer to the southern flood channel. The fog rolled in here almost every evening, heavy enough to blur shapes, light enough to keep the headlamp beam useful. At 6:42 p.m., Grace started her run. She kept her pace steady, heart rate up but not exhausting. Her headlamp cast a pale cone ahead of her, the world beyond it dissolving into mist. The creek ran parallel to her right, the sound of water a constant low murmur. Her breathing became the metronome, left, right, the rhythmic crunch of her shoes on damp earth. She hit the section where the trail narrowed, forcing her closer to the tree line. Out of habit, she checked her six, empty, just a tunnel of fog behind her. Too soon, she thought, keep going. At the quarter-mile mark, her earpiece crackled softly, Leo's voice, low and deliberate. Thermal shows movement on your left, about 50 yards back. Single heat signature, could be him. Grace didn't turn her head. Copy. She let her stride shorten slightly, feigning fatigue. Her headlamp beam bobbed with the motion. The murmur of the creek grew louder. Leo's voice again, closing to 40 yards, stopping when you stop. He's shadowing. Grace's pulse kicked. She glanced down at her watch, then veered right, stepping off the main trail toward the faint track that led to the flood channel. The ground dipped, softening underfoot. 30 yards. The fog seemed to pulse with her breathing. She reached the lip of the channel and started down the slope, boots sliding in the mud. The headlamp lit the shallow water below, the faint glisten of wet stones. She kept moving forward into the cut where the walls rose and the fog thickened. 20 yards, her earpiece hissed. Grace, we've lost him on thermal. He's in the channel with you. She slowed, pretending to check her watch again. The fog wrapped her in its damp grip, blurring her own beam into a weak halo. A sound behind her, the soft slap of bare feet on mud. Grace turned slowly, letting her expression register mild surprise. Through the fog, a figure emerged, tall, lean, clothes clinging wet to his legs, bare feet slick with mud. His face was in shadow, but the eyes caught the headlamp's edge, flat, unreadable. Evening, she said, her tone casual, almost friendly. He didn't answer. You lost, she tried again, still nothing. He took another step, the water rippling around his ankles. Her right hand dropped to her thigh, hovering near the concealed holster. Trails back that way, she said, nodding past him. Lot easier than the channel. Another step forward, close enough now for her to see the faint glisten on his hands, water, sweat. No, something thicker. Her earpiece buzzed. Leo, 2 more heat signatures inbound from the mine's side. Grace, you're boxed. Adrenaline hit like a jolt of electricity. She backed up a half step, keeping her beam on the man's chest. Don't, she said, his head tilted slightly like a curious animal. From the fog behind him, shapes began to coalesce, one taller, one shorter, both moving with that same unnerving silence. The smaller shape shifted, and Grace caught a glimpse of pale skin, bare feet, not an accomplice, a victim. The taller newcomer said something low to the barefoot man, too muffled to catch. The man in front of her stepped sideways as if to block her line of sight. Units move, Leo's voice cut through. We're coming to you. Grace decided not to wait. She stepped in hard, shoving the man off balance into the wall of the channel. He slipped in the mud and she yanked her weapon free, swinging it toward the taller shape in the fog. Police, don't move, the taller shape froze. The smaller one bolted past Grace, splashing up the channel toward the trail. Go, she shouted over her shoulder. Leo and the backup units converged from both ends of the channel, their lights cutting spears through the fog. The taller figure turned to run, but Hawk stepped out from the side cut, a shotgun leveled casually at his chest. End of the line, Hawk said. The man in front of Grace was still on the ground, mud streaking his arms and chest. She kept her gun on him until Leo cuffed him. Got our barefoot runner, Leo said, breathless. Name S. Evan Rourke, ex-search and rescue volunteer, lives less than 10 miles from here. And the other, Grace asked. Leo glanced at Hawk, who still had his gun trained on the taller man. Not sure yet, but he's coming with us. The victim, a teenage girl, shaking and barefoot, was already wrapped in a blanket by one of the medics at the trailhead. She wouldn't meet Grace's eyes, but when Grace crouched beside her and asked, "You're safe now," the girl gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The fog was thinning again, burned off by the harsh beams of the portable floodlights. The channel, so recently a trap, looked almost ordinary now. Leo came up beside her. We got Rourke on attempted kidnapping. The second guy's clamming up, but we'll get there. No sign of Ethan or Maya yet. Grace looked back toward the dark mouth of the channel. Then we're not done. The trial was over quicker than anyone expected. Evan Rourke's court-appointed attorney had tried to stall motions to suppress requests for psychiatric evaluation, but the evidence from the channel was too clean, too damning. The girl's testimony, though halting, had been steady enough to stand. Combined with Rourke's fingerprints on her arm and mud samples matching the flood channel, the jury didn't need long. Guilty. Attempted kidnapping, unlawful restraint, assault. No mention of Ethan Cole. No mention of Maya Ellis. Grace sat in the back row of the courtroom when the verdict was read, watching Rourke's face. He didn't flinch, didn't scowl, just sat there as if the words were being spoken in another language. When the bailiff moved to take him into custody, Rourke glanced over his shoulder, eyes scanning the gallery until they found her. There was no threat in his stare, no anger, just something flat, unreadable, the same emptiness she'd seen that night in the channel. In the weeks after, the sheriff's office was swamped with calls from media outlets, true crime podcasts, even a couple of streaming docuseries producers. Everyone wanted the story of the barefoot man in the fog. Grace refused all interviews. The case file on Rourke was thick now, but her desk still had another one thinner but heavier in a different way. Ethan Cole, missing person, open. Maya Ellis, missing person, open. They de-searched the flood channels for days after Rourke's arrest, even bringing in specialized cadaver dogs. Nothing, not a shred of clothing, not a footprint beyond the night she'd run as bait. Leo stopped by one afternoon, 2 paper cups of coffee in hand. He set one in front of her, leaned against the edge of the desk. "You read Rourke's psych eval yet?" he asked. "Parts of it," she said. "Borderline personality traits, obsessive tendencies, fixation on control. Doesn't explain the others." Leo nodded. "The second guy we pulled in from the channel, no record, lawyered up fast, walked 3 days later." "And the girl?" Grace asked. "She's with family in Raleigh, won't talk about what happened in there. Not to us, not to anyone." Grace swiveled the coffee cup slowly between her palms. "You think Rourke had help?" "I think," Leo said carefully. "We caught one fisherman in a river full of lines." The only time Grace saw Ethan's sister after the trial was in the quiet of the station lobby, long after the reporters had gone home. Natalie Diaz walked in wearing a plain black coat, her eyes shadowed from weeks without proper sleep. "Is it true," Natalie asked, "that you think this Rourke guy wasn't the one who took Ethan?" Grace gestured toward her office. They sat across from each other, the desk between them stacked with files. "Rourke hunted in the same corridor," Grace said. "We can place him at Maya's disappearance, and we stopped him before he took that girl, but there's nothing to tie him to Ethan." Natalie's voice broke. "So you're saying you don't know?" "I'm saying I can't prove it," Grace said softly. "But I believe Ethan's case is connected. I just can't give you the ending you deserve." Natalie's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She stood after a moment, straightening her coat. I want to know he didn't suffer." Grace hesitated. "From what we've seen in other cases, if he was taken, it would have been quick." Natalie gave a faint, brittle smile. "You're a terrible liar, detective." She left without another word. Rourke's sentencing came and went. 10 years. It felt like a fraction of the harm he'd done, or the harm he might have done if they hadn't set the trap. Hawk showed up on the courthouse steps afterward, leaning on the railing like he'd been there all morning. "You get your man," he said. "One of them," Grace answered. Hawk studied her a moment. "River's quieter lately, not as many folks walking where they shouldn't." "Because they're scared," Grace said. "Fear keeps some alive," Hawk replied. He glanced down the street. "You want my advice, you stop looking for the rest. The river's got a long memory." Grace shook her head. "I'm not built to stop looking." Hawk gave her a half smile. "Then you'd better learn to live with fog." It was nearly 2 months later when Grace found herself back at the Blackwater shore. Not for a case, not for evidence, just because something in her refused to let it go. The sun was low, staining the water copper. The winter air was sharp enough to sting her lungs. She stood at the same gravel bar where Ethan's empty canteen had been found, listening to the slow slap of the current against the bank. In the quiet, she could almost hear Luke's voice, her brother, lost so many years ago, blending with Ethan S., with Maya S., with all the others who'd stepped into the fog and never come out. She knew better than to romanticize it. There was no poetry in what had happened here, but there was something, a presence, maybe, that she couldn't name. She took a breath, her words barely more than a whisper. I don't believe you keep what you want, not forever. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of cold water and pine. For a moment the fog on the far bank parted, and she thought she saw a figure there, tall, still, barefoot, watching. Then it was gone. Back at the station, she slid Ethan's and Maya's files into the bottom drawer of her desk. They would stay open, she would keep looking. But she also knew what Hawk had meant. In this job, you had to make peace with the fact that sometimes you only get part of the truth. The rest stays in the fog. Epilogue: weeks later, a package arrived at the sheriff's department addressed simply to Detective Grace Marlowe. No return address. Inside, wrapped in brown paper, was a single white athletic sock, clean, dry, folded neatly. No note, no explanation. Grace held it for a long time before sealing it in an evidence bag. Then she pinned the bag to the center of the board in her office, right between Ethan's photo and the map of the Blackwater corridor. The corridor was still there, the fog was still there, and so was she.